All right.
All right, I see some people are joining. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're just going to give everyone a minute or so to log in, get situated, and then we'll get started. Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining. We're going to give it about 30 seconds or so, and then we'll get started. All right, it looks pretty stable on people joining, so I think we can go ahead and jump into this. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Americans for Safe Access is excited to partner with this research webinar using cannabis research to inform policy and education. So we're really excited to really, dive into the details of that. I also want to take a second from the top to thank our sponsors, Weedmaps, the Conigma, Dr. Bronner's, and Lakeway Botanicals. And sponsors like them, ASA is not able to do this education work and really get the information out there about research and patient rights. And so we are very thankful for our sponsors today for helping to bring us this research webinar. My name is Abbey Roudebush. I am the new Director of Government Affairs at Americans for Safe Access. I just joined about a month or so ago, maybe a little less than that. So I am brand new and just wanted to take this opportunity to introduce myself to everyone on this webinar. And I am positive you'll be hearing much more from me in the future. Of course, we're talking about research. Safe Access also makes it a priority to work on research policy on the legislative and regulatory front. So while we're talking about research that exists today, I think we can all agree that we would benefit from much, much more. So if you are interested in keeping in touch with ASA and the work we're doing and participating in that, please consider becoming an ASA member. It's only $35 a year, and you get updates and action alerts and can follow along with. And also there are other benefits that come with it, including discounts, including with our partner today at Cannakeys. So you can become an ASA member on the website and help us further cannabis research policy in the future. With that, I will stop talking and turn it over to our expert panel. I'm really excited to hear the discussion today. So I will hand the reins over to Dustin, and I'll let you get the show started.
Thank you so much, Abby, and thanks again for the great intro. Great opportunity to chat about a lot of great content today. My name is Dustin McDonald. I'm the National Policy Director for Americans for Safe Access. Today, we're gathered to talk about an issue that I know frustrates patients, physicians, researchers alike, which is really this kind of state of affairs we're in, where we have 36 states, the District of Columbia, 4 US territories, over 80 countries around the world who have reformed their laws, including some world organizations like United Nations and their Commission on Drugs and World Health Organization. You have all of these forces who are working to reform and have reformed laws authorizing the use of medical cannabis to treat conditions ranging from neurological to physical. Yet we have pretty much the entire medical community that we know as the traditional medical establishment under the Food and Drug Administration, professional associations like the American Medical Association, completely divorced from the actual science of the research, the state of affairs on research, where are we with science, to actual practitioner applications of cannabis medicine to treat all kinds of these conditions. So that's really what we're here to talk about today is what are the challenges that are born from these knowledge gaps, from this lack of engagement from the traditional health world into the cannabis world, while the cannabis world is pervasive across the globe now from a medical standpoint. What are some of the results of all of that, and how can we chop through organizing some solutions? So we have an incredible panel, as Abbey mentioned, lined up to talk through that. I'd like to turn it over to the panel to introduce themselves, starting with ACE's own Heather Daybre, who runs our PSC training program, among other things. Just provide a quick bio as we get ready to kick this off.
Thanks, Dustin. My name is Heather Daybre. I am the director of the PFC program at Americans for Safe Access. We are the compliance side of things. We provide business certifications and training and education to both the cannabis and hemp industries. We are also recently ISO 17065 accredited as a certifying body and have been approved in a number of different states to provide both mandatory and voluntary training for industry workers there. So very happy to be participating on this panel because research is definitely a big part of what I do at PFC. Thank you.
Sorry, next, can we have hear from Doug?
Sure, Dustin, thanks very much. Good to be with everyone today. My name is Douglas Reil, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Cannakeys. And our mission is to build platforms that empower patients and medical professionals, educators, and advocates with the tools to maximize the effectiveness of cannabis therapeutics and to create agency with regard to their applications. I'm also the program director for Mission Compassion, a compassion program based here in the Bay Area of California. We support low-income patients with access to necessary cannabinoid therapies to deal with conditions that are often the reason for their economic situation. And I'm also a patient myself. So that's me. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather and Doug, and excited to get both your perspectives today. Also, let's hear from Elana.
Thanks, Dustin. Hi, everyone. My name is Elana Goldberg. I'm the CEO of the Canigma. For anyone who hasn't heard of the Canigma is an evidence-based cannabis education site. Our mission is to get credible information about cannabis in front of whoever needs it. So whether that's on the patient or consumer side or healthcare providers, regulators, really across the board, what's important to us is that the information is evidence-based. So obviously the state of the research is super important to us. Really excited to be on this panel and to talk about this topic.
Thank you for joining us, Elana. Let's also hear from Uwe.
Hi there, it's a pleasure to be here today. My name is Uwe Blesching, and for the last 10 or 12 years or so, I've been mostly doing writing and research in and about the cannabinoid health sciences. I've written 3 books on the topic, and I'm currently working as the Chief Science Officer at Cannakeys. And just to provide you a little bit more information, I also worked for about 20 years or so as a paramedic for the city and county of San Francisco.
Interesting. We have much to talk about. Did a lot of advocacy for the city and county of San Francisco back in the day from the federal side to include their public safety services. Let's also hear from Dr. Tischler.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming today. My name is Jordan Tischler. I am a physician and a cannabis specialist. So I am here representing the medical side of things, and really, in the context of our discussion about research, I'm sort of the prototype of the people who need to get this information and who need to be able to digest it and put it into practice. For myself, we were talking about this yesterday, spent hours, years digging through all of this scientific literature on my own to become well versed at this, as I've been doing this now for about 10 years. But the idea that we can provide this information in an unbiased but easily accessible and digestible fashion for my colleagues is part of the reason that we want to talk today. And it's also part of the reason that I'm the founder of the Association of Cannabinoid Specialists, which is a not-for-profit internationally. It's focused on sort of being the counterpart for ASA when in focusing on the physician and clinician side of things. And thanks for having me.
Fantastic. So as Abbey mentioned, kicking this off, we have a great group of panelists with offering really great perspectives coming from the patient side, coming from the research side, coming from the medical practitioner side, really trying to get at this issue of we have this huge information gap between patients, between people who are using cannabis as medicine, between physicians who are working with those patients, researchers, traditional medical community. So with all of that said, with all these great perspectives to offer, let's just go ahead and dive in to the first question, which is really kind of predicated on that exact conundrum that we're here to talk about. So we have this issue where you've got 36 states in DC with medical cannabis policies in place, a number of states going down the road on reform, 17 states with adult use policies layered in on top. You've got global change reforming cannabis laws. All the while, you've got traditional medical establishment, physician training groups and associations, leading groups like the American Medical Association, Food and Drug Administration, largely divorced from this entire path of medicine. Certainly there's a lot in there, but the reason why we're mainly here is to talk about this is all doing harm to patients. It's doing harm to them across legal access to the composition of the products that they call medicine, access to those products, the affordability of those products, the level of physician education and understanding how those products interact with any other FDA-approved products that that patient may be taking. So I guess our first question is really, with all of that mess in front of us, I guess from each of your perspectives, really starting with Heather, for your profession and for folks in your field, what are the challenges born by that mess? And ultimately, what are the impacts born for people in your field and the folks you're interacting with to try to train, as well as on the research side, starting with Heather, and then really the same question kind of driving through the panel?
Sure. Thanks, Dustin. I think, one of the challenges that we experience is really just trying to find the right information. One of the big things that ASA puts out is our State of the States report, and I'm currently grading our consumer safety product protection section, and it's a mishmash of regulations between all of the different states because some just want to jump on board with other states, some don't want to jump on board. We still have perpetuating things like transcription errors where things were cut and pasted incorrectly from one state to another state. So there's just this giant mess of things, and it's very challenging to really figure out how to make a persuasive argument when we have things like FDA comments come up and USDA comments come up, because we want to make sure that we're protecting patients in a meaningful way. But what is meaningful if every single producer in different states is doing it differently, and there's no standardized method of production, there's no standardized labeling requirements, there's no standardized body of knowledge around what we should actually be implementing here as far as ways to protect patients and stuff. And so I think one of the challenges that we have is really kind of getting all of this information, into a singular location where we can figure out, okay, so we're talking about the FDA trying to figure out how to regulate a pathway for this. Okay, well, let's figure out where can harms come in? Where can problems arise during these processes? And how can we institute changes that would be effective across the board? The FDA has good manufacturing practices for pharmaceutical products, for dietary supplements. We have nothing for cannabis products, and we have nothing for CBD products, especially. In certain states, cannabis products are regulated a little bit more heavily, or at all more so than CBD products. But how does this help patients? Because they're getting all of this different information. And so we want to make sure that we're providing accurate information to patients so that they can effectively select their medicine. And we can't do that without information being readily available and being able to give that information to regulators in a way that's going to be meaningful and actually impact change so that we can produce quality products that aren't going to be subject to recalls, that aren't going to have contaminants of public health impact, so that we're not seeing outbreaks like salmonella or E. coli that we see in other agricultural industries. We want to make sure that we have all of those protections put into place. And so one of the big challenges is really just doing that. I think one of the good things is that we're starting to see more information come out. But really getting all of that information and putting it into some place that's meaningful, that's understandable, is going to be the next step. You know, as we're looking at all of these different state regulations, there's no one repository for all of the state information. You've got to go to the Department of Health. You've got to go to the Department of Health and Human Services. You've got to go to the Department of Agriculture. You've got to look at all of these different places instead of being able to just like, oh, hey, where's my state regulations? Oh, look, here's all of the things that I need to do. Here's all this information. And then how do we get that information to regulators that's meaningful? So kind of probably went over my time allotment there a little bit.
No, I think you really captured a lot in there, Heather. And I think it makes a nice transition in kind of passing things over to Doug on the patient perspective, because what you're really addressing here is, look, you've got a 36 state different version of everything from testing standards to requirements for operating facilities that range from product cultivation to manufacturing to testing to distribution to retail. Ultimately, through that wild supply chain that's not consistent from state to state, we're producing medicine at the end that people are supposed to be taking to treat their health. And so I think like you're really kind of raising a lot of the red flags that are borne by this lack of consistent standards. And ultimately, we're all end up is on the government side of this talking about that, but you know how this ultimately affects patients in the marketplace. But I think that's a great perspective to share. Doug, if you want to take up the helm from there and talk to us about like, look, this is how the rubber meets the road and all this from the patient standpoint.
Sure. Yeah, Heather hit on so many important related aspects to it. I mean, my background as a patient is a long one. I moved to California in 1996, the year Prop 215 was enacted, and dispensaries were beginning, though the industry goes back well before that, certainly. And even before that, I've been working on my healing path with Crohn's disease for over 4 decades now. And I was really excited when the discussion around medical cannabis started. And I didn't move to California for that, but it was a happy coincidence. But what I found was, as I started to talk to my doctors, both primary and specialists, what I ran into was a reticence to even have the conversations. And they cited a number of different things, but a lot of the similarities came down to the fact that the doctors felt that there wasn't enough information. They had a lack of comfort about stepping in, and ultimately they just didn't know. And so they didn't want to speak out of turn. And so it was a challenge for me to find about information, much less the prescriptions that I needed to actually access the medicine at the time. So as I started to learn more, and there were more opportunities to engage, and I found some doctors who knew enough to support me and write prescriptions, started to be able to access the medicine. And then there was a whole new layers of challenge came in. And those involved what I should take, what form I should take, what dose I should take. And trying to find that information has been, and certainly was 10, 15 years ago, was a real challenge, because it's a bit of an upside down place where your doctors are not able to support you with those specifics. And my prescribing doctors had some good guidance, but I was also hearing a lot of different things, and different dispensary employees, I felt, gave me very good information, but it could vary widely, as I'm sure the experience of a lot of other patients. And so ultimately, as Heather was reflecting, how does the information come together to be in trusted sources and places that can actually speak to patients in their wide range of expertise and understanding of these topics? Because ultimately, cannabinoid therapeutics are complex. They're a process-oriented medicine, and you have to work with them over time for the best results. And so that's also a challenge for doctors, and that I've experienced on that. And I would also say, from the compassion side and working with patients to provide access, they bring not necessarily a lot of questions, but as you start to talk to them about conditions, what their experience is and what they're looking for to try to match up donations from licensed entities with those patients, it raises a lot of questions. And what bubbles up is that a lot of patients don't have the understanding even to ask the right questions. Examples just of people wanting high THC products, not understanding that there's whole ranges of other products and ratios available to them that might be more appropriate for them. And it's not our job to do that. We're just trying to create access, but not having a medical establishment for them to fall back on is a real shame. So from the patient perspective, yeah, we're on our path for in many ways on our own. There's a lot of great resources out there, but there's a lot of work still to do.
Great points I think you raised there. I think as patients, we all are kind of choosing our own adventure in a lot of ways, driving down this path, because to your point, a lot of the resources you'd expect from a traditional established medical community where you go to your doctor, explain your symptoms, and they would provide a treatment regimen that might be cannabis-based or traditionally FDA-approved medicine-based. Like you said, you can't have that conversation now because there's not that level of education among doctors. And to your point, that's interesting about the actual products. Compassion programs exist among a number of states to try to provide affordability options to patients who are disadvantaged, which is a more serious issue now as we're continue to be in an economic downturn. But you know, the issue in California, I think, is an interesting one to raise. You have a compassion program that exists, and the entire structure of it is really left to industry and individual patients, groups like Dear Cannabis and others, to unite that system and actually make it work. And to your actual point, there's nobody in between to say, hey, this medicine works for this condition, so you producers make this product for this patient group that's approximately this population size. None of that exists as a result. So that's another kind of terrible outcome of this conundrum. Elana, what are your thoughts from Conigma's standpoint in terms of really kind of amplifying this information, connecting it with different audiences?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, I really relate to what Heather and Doug both said, but I don't want to kind of labor those points. So there's two kind of areas that I feel like really come up as a challenge for us. And I've got my journalist hat on now. So really looking at it in terms of like creating this educational content to go out. So let's just talk about like the lay audience to begin with. So the first thing is speed. The amount of time and resources that it takes for us to properly, categorize all the information. Like, for example, about 2 years ago when we were putting together the conditions section on our website, we've got about 80 different conditions mapped out there. And we're looking at basically like, can cannabis help with X condition? And it's like huge amounts of time taken just to categorize that research there. So that's number one, is just having like fast, accessible information to the research. And of course, it's always being updated. So this is like, one member of our team, this is like at least a day a week for him, just going through like all of the new research that's come out, even if we're just to look at what's going on PubMed alone, for him to categorize that and work out, okay, is there anything on Canigma which is now out of date that we need to update? Or is there anything where we need to say, okay, we've got more supporting evidence for this particular point, and where can we slot that study in as a source? So just, pure amount of time and energy needed to wade through all of that. So that's number one. And then number two is the context, contextualizing research when it comes to cannabis. I mean, in general, this is true, but specifically in the cannabis space is crucial, because there are so many kind of myths when it comes to cannabis that we believe we know from the research. But actually it's come from research where the research was just done on cannabis. And what is cannabis? We need to have a breakdown of what that means. And so the importance of taking what we know from the research and then contextualizing that research is even more important, and even more crucial in destigmatizing the plant, which is of course what we're all trying to do here in some way, shape or form. So I guess, yeah, those are the two things that really come up as challenges for us. And I know we're going to start talking about solutions down the line, which is super exciting.
Indeed. Yeah, and you definitely hit on a lot of the big challenges there that are great to call out. And I think a big one that, we all continue to face is, you mentioned PubMed, and I know we'll dig into this a little bit more with Dr. Tischler, but, you've got a kind of the ubiquitous resource that physicians turn to it for a lot of kind of alternative, what's going on with things I'm not familiar with in medicine, or I want to read up and learn more about. But to your point, it's not organized in any particular way that's user-friendly that you can understand from a physician standpoint, certainly not from a patient standpoint. And like you say, while the resource of PubMed is largely available and free, digging into abstracts costs money, and most people aren't going to pay for that. And to your point, not really written for the layman's perspective. They're not going to get it even if they do read it. So, you've got this giant body of research that, to your point, takes a tremendous amount of time just to update daily. And there's no central repository for physicians, patients, research to go to kind of like chop through all this and be on the same page. So with that understanding, Uwe, why don't you tell us a little bit about the research side of all of this and what you've seen, some of these gaps and challenges as a result of where things are in research and the lack of of everybody's having the same knowledge base on that front.
Sure, Dustin. I'm coming from a writer's and researcher's perspective, and so I share the need with patients, with their caretakers, their healthcare providers, with policymakers, with product makers. We all need access to the latest state of the science, and that need, that determines if cannabis is positive to work for a particular condition or not. And that need is amplified, significantly amplified by the rapid growth of the literature that is published on a daily basis in the cannabinoid health sciences. For instance, on PubMed, if the current trend continues, there are about 10 new studies on a daily basis added to this giant pool of data that, the way I look at it is where's Waldo? You remember those old pictures that are very complex, and your task is to find Waldo's hiding somewhere in there. And where I'm coming from, Waldo is clinically actionable data, clinically actionable information that allows us to optimize the plant constituents that are going to produce the best results for each individual patient. And that is an enormous task. However, there are a number of research tools we can employ to distill that data and to collect that data and present it in such a way that that task becomes manageable, and where that task becomes a fairly easy process, where we have the information that we really need at our fingertips. And so that is at the bit of context I wanted to start out with.
Thank you. Perfect. Perfect for our needs from that angle this morning. Dr. Tischler, why don't you talk to us a little bit about, from the physician side, for you as a physician, for other physicians, you're in this place where you have patients coming in and they're talking to you about cannabis medicine. If you weren't already in this lane, where are the gaps, like from the physician standpoint? What are the challenges to this information, to getting it shared among physicians more broadly, driven through their trade organizations like AMA and others? And what are some of the where the rubber meets the road in your office? What ultimately is the impact?
I spend a lot of time making sure that I know what's going on and I'm informed and I'm reading the science. And so I think that, that's an interesting barrier, but it's a necessary one. And it's something that somebody like myself commits to in the process of being, relatively expert and practicing this kind of medicine. There's this, we've heard it on this panel today, that there's sort of this mantra that the doctors don't know what they're doing. And I think that really does the world a disservice. It is true that the endocannabinoid system was discovered more recently than most of my colleagues were in medical school. But then again, there are many other things that have been discovered in that period of time, and physicians learn that information when they need to learn it. It's now becoming more clear, I think, to the sort of general physician population that they need to know more about this. And I will say that I give multiple talks per week on this subject, and I am It's only because they invite me to give the talk, so that shows something about their interest, and that they ask very insightful and deep and meaningful questions, and they really want to understand this. I also think that given the amount of effort and specialized knowledge that it takes to really do this kind of medicine, that this sort of old California model where, you know, you'd go to your primary care doc and they would just say, here's a slip, go down to the dispensary. I don't think that's going to fly. Primary care does not have the bandwidth to spend time getting into this detail with their patients. Just as an example, you know, most primary care folks spend 10 to 15 minutes with their patient, maybe once a year, and I spend an hour. And I don't have to talk about seatbelts and breast exams and mammograms and, you know, pap smears and all of those other things that are very important. So I'm just, you know, so I think that the model of primary care and specialty care apply here as well. And that's why I'm out there trying to grow more specialists on this subject. I also think that we really need, you know, you guys talked a little bit about using data to inform policy. And I think that that's a huge part of this. That right now in my practice as somebody who does this, you know, all the time, I still find that I am vastly hampered by the fact that there is so much misinformation out there, and that this industry really willfully promulgates that information as a means to get patients to buy different products and more of products and stuff like that. It's my contention that we really need to move back, at least on the medical side of things, towards something that's a little bit more conventional, where we can write a prescription so that we have a pretty good sense that when we say to a patient, this is what I think is going to help you, that they actually even get that medicine and then start on it. And if it works, great. And if it doesn't, then we can know what's going on and move on to plan B. But right now, you know, between all of different states, and it's all this recommendee stuff, ultimately, I think that puts our patients at risk.
Agreed. So much that you just tackled in there that I think is important to kind of raise. You know, I think to the point of how all of this information and lack of understanding, lack of kind of collective understanding among policymakers, regulators, lawmakers, and everybody in the health policy world, as well as the health practitioner and regulatory world, that lack of understanding among that population has real impacts on patients. Everything from patient rights and civil protections. You've got a wide variety of state laws as they pertain to protection of patients. I can join and participate in the California State Medical Program, which is voluntary, but underneath that program, I can still lose my job for testing positive for cannabis use by my employer, which is kind of insane. Of course, it doesn't stop there. More deep things are threatened, like child custody in states from these models, as well as housing, driving. There's numerous issues in terms of patient compromise on civil rights, but of course, we're also talking about patient safety when it comes to the organization and composition of medicine. To Heather's shop, you know, there's a ton in there that's got to be worked out. So we've got actually safe medicine that's out on the street. Some of these models, California to be included, authorize like a 10 to 15% deviation in product safety standards across molds, pesticides, and contaminants to basically allow industry participants to catch up to where they ought to be actually producing safe medicine. Again, we're talking about medicine here, and a variety of approaches to regulating it that ultimately have this impact on patients, but of course, everybody along the chain, leading them to include physicians. So really appreciate you raising all of that piece as well. I think now is a great time to kind of pivot to the solution side of this. So we've covered a lot of like the challenges and barriers to embracing the education that's out there, and really kind of trying to get education expanded and amplified more broadly. So there is more consensus on this. But as we kind of drive through this, and I'd like to start with Heather again, you know, what are your kind of understandings about in a world where that solution existed, where there might be more ubiquitous understanding among your traditional health world in terms of health professionals and their trade groups like AMA, health regulators like the FDA, and everybody across HHS and their sub-agencies associated with regulating this, folks within DOJ like DEA. Assuming that all this information is connected, I guess what do we see as the positive impacts in your world, you know, from the regulatory standpoint, from the product manufacturing testing standpoint? You know, what do we really see as kind of what does that world look like where those solutions exist for folks in your field? Kind of starting kicking off with Heather.
Sure. So, I mean, I think one of the, there's already some groups out there that are trying to do it. You have the Cannabis Regulators Association. They're attempting to try and streamline regulations across, the various states and make them more harmonious. I think probably one of the best solutions for this is to just, we don't really necessarily want federal oversight, but we need a collective agreement that this is how we're going to produce this. This is what we're going to call medicine. This is what there is a difference between a medical product and an off-the-shelf product. Like over-the-counter medicines are still produced by GMP standards, even though you can buy them at Walgreens and CVS and your neighborhood pharmacy. Cannabis seems to be falling under this different thing. You can't just get an over-the-counter medicine. You have to go to a dispensary. That dispensary should be set up in a way to protect your medicine, but you should know that your medicine's been produced in a safe and meaningful way also. And so I think, some of these solutions are really just figuring out how to get that accurate information, accurate knowledge. Why are we testing for certain things? People don't understand. They're like, why do we even bother testing for some of these random microbials? Because they're issues of public health significance, and we want to know, what does the research show us on how E. coli contamination can affect you from a public health perspective? And we have a lot of that information. We just need to streamline the information about how can cannabinoids help you from a public health perspective while still producing them in a way that is meaningful and safe to the end consumer.
So with those broader set of regulations, more streamlined, to your point about CANRA, the multi-state regulatory group of cannabis regulators, assuming they're able to arrive upon a model that is united in terms of how it approaches market participants, everything from standard setting for what should or shouldn't be in cannabis medicine once it finally hits the consumer at legal retail, to standard setting for processes for how these facilities are run to ensure that they're operating in a safe way. That can certainly do a lot to level the playing field in terms of how all of this stuff gets organized and gets delivered safely to patients. I guess driving on that point a little bit on the policy side, you've got this multi-state group, but you've also got 36 different versions of it that also includes a tax component, which states are obviously going to be reluctant to part with as we kind of think about federal policy kind of overlaying all of this. I know you mentioned this notion of kind of having this standard setting exist before federal regulators dig in, having kind of maybe like a self-regulatory organization type model organized where you have these standards organized before we go to the feds, and they're really kind of the nexus where all this standard setting should exist through organizations or through federal departments and agencies like Department of Commerce, NIST, and others. So I guess, how do you see, just real quick on that, Heather, how do you see kind of those worlds colliding? I guess, do you see these state regulators approaching federal regulators with something that's optimal, or is it more of kind of like, hey, here's a conglomeration of our cookie model. We think you should do this.
Okay, well, in a dreamland called Everything Goes My Way, everyone would just get PFC certified because it is a standard. So at the federal level, we have things like good agricultural practices and good manufacturing practices. And then people who are operating in the states know, okay, the Department of Agriculture said I have to, get GAP certified. So how am I going to get GAP certified? Oh, the federal government said all the state manufacturers have to get GMP certified. It's not an unheard of thing. There's plenty of groups that offer GMP certification, similar to PFC certification. But ideally, we take the time, we figure it out. Look, we got to have safety standards in place. And so maybe testing to 10 to the third CFUs per gram isn't the ideal solution, but we need to have a standardization of something in place while we work out the fine details, because we need the research and we need to be allowed to do the research to work out the fine point details. Maybe 10 to the third CFUs per gram is an appropriate limit for an edible product, but not for an inhalable product. We need to know what are these contaminant limits, what are these potency limits that are going to be meaningful, and applying a standard production across the board isn't going to change that. It's just going to help them produce it more safely and more consistently.
Let's talk a little bit now with Elana. What's your perspective on this from Conigma standpoint? in a world where all of this information is more ubiquitous and shared, I guess, how is a group like Canigma that's done so much to organize all this information and try to present it to people in a digestible way? How are you participating in that world? And I guess, what does that world look like in terms of real solutions? What do you see as the solutions here?
Just unmute myself there. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a lovely fantasy world. I'd love to live there as well. I hope it won't be too long until we are living there. And I think also it's important to zoom out and look at the global perspective here. I know that a lot of the conversation is focused around the United States, but our audience is a global audience. And when it comes down to the findings of cannabis research are evergreen. They're not geospecific. And so also, if you're to look at the kind of state of different medical cannabis programs around the world, this research is relevant at different times. There's more and more countries that it's becoming relevant for. And then you need to look at the products available and how consumers and patients can actually use that information. Because if you're living in an area where you only have access to one type of CBD oil, for example, it doesn't really matter what the research says about THC products. So I think the regulation needs to catch up across the board in order for the findings from the research to be relevant for everyone. There's a lot of educational material that we have on the Canigma at the moment, which unfortunately is irrelevant for most of the people in the world, because if you're only able to buy on the illicit market, for example, then there's no way you're going to have any information of the chemical profile of your products, which means that, again, it's useless. So I think really what has to happen first, and this is something we keep going over and over, is for the regulation to catch up there so that the information can be useful. And so, we can make it as clear and simple, as accessible as we want, but people need to have access in order for that to be relevant to them.
Got it, agreed. And so I think it seems like a fundamental issue we're talking about here is that access to the information and putting it in a place where people are used to finding it. Like, say, for your patients, where do they go to find information about any condition or potential treatments? Probably the internet. they're Googling, searching around. Physicians have their own sources that they go to, as do their trade groups and medical regulators at various levels of government. We got to get all this information to the places where they usually have them. So Dr. Tischler, what does that look like to you?
Oh, my mic is open. What does that look like to me? I think on the physician side of things, it's we need to aggregate this information someplace that's easy for them. And I think that we're later going to talk about that, and I think that'll be very helpful. I think that there is this issue sort of that was articulated of the regulations versus science, which has to come first. I think that they have to exist in parallel, but we need, I think, to generate regulation that really supports patients, and that from my perspective is actually probably a little bit different, which is to say that I think that if you look at the industry at the moment, there's a very strong push to push people into sort of DIYing their healthcare. And that's ultimately to the benefit of an industry, but not necessarily the benefit of the patient. And there's also this idea that the word access has essentially become a buzzword for having the availability of the medicine or the substances. And I would argue that that's maybe half the battle, but ultimately that any medication to be used properly and safely and effectively, access to the information and the guidance that go along with appropriate use is actually a bigger hurdle. And so, it is true that in this country, at least, something like 85% of people now live in areas where they have access to the substance. And yet what we see is that very few people are getting the kind of treatment that they need, even if they do get themselves a card. So we really need to be in a position where we can put together regulations. We've talked about the safety and the GMP and all that stuff, but that's not enough. We have to go beyond that to really make it so that there is some process by which patients get care that looks a lot more like a traditional, or I usually use the word conventional, medical model and a pharmacy model in which patients come to their physician, and if their physician isn't knowledgeable enough in that area, then they're referred to a specialist, and the specialist then writes out a treatment plan that moves forward in a way so that the patient gets the right medicine, the safe medicine, and is able to use it with the guidance of that professional. And then that there's a feedback loop so that that professional can adjust that process. And it's not this sort of dabbling process that right now is sort of the norm, and very much to the bottom line advantage of companies that are taking essentially advantage of our patients that way.
Well, you raised a lot of great points there, from product safety to appropriate medicine used for a specific treatment for a patient condition, which I think, look, the opioid crisis presents an excellent example of that. Of course, we heard a ton about the opioid crisis before COVID, and I think COVID kind of sucked all the air out of the room with respect to the public health crisis from a political standpoint, and pretty much everywhere you look standpoint. There's nothing else really to talk about, but the opioid crisis goes on unabated. Largely still the same mess it was before as the Sackler family walks away from it. You have many physicians from the emergency room to private practice who are still using opioids, that are prescribing opioids for patients from chronic pain issues to you name it. Meanwhile, cannabis is a safe alternative that physicians across 36 states are largely unaware of. Huge problem there. So like driving through that a little bit, I wonder if we might be able to talk a little bit
Dustin,
about that.
Can I jump in on the opioid crisis for a second there? Because I think it's very complicated, because, we lose tens of thousands of people in the United States per year to opioid death. And that is a horrible, unacceptable number without question. But the result of the fanning of the public awareness of this opioid crisis and the subsequent federal government's involvement in it has led to a sort of bizarre backlash against patients who need opioids. And so in the protection of the 40 to 70,000 people who might suffer, we have taken the 6 to 12 million American chronic pain sufferers and put their lives in jeopardy. So there's just more nuance and double-edged sword there than we're recognizing. And where this comes into play with cannabis is, you're right, we need more emphasis on using cannabinoids as an alternative or a first line or a higher line choice over opioids, without question. But to my point about having this done in a rigorous and controlled fashion, we're seeing patients get their cards to treat pain with cannabinoids without enough guidance, so that they end up ultimately using far too much cannabis. And as a result, we're going to say from here forward, maybe 5 or 7 years, we're going to have a cannabis crisis, because we're going to have a percentage of that population move into a place where they are overusing or misusing cannabis. We already have that sort of problem now, but it's going to become that much greater when we unleash this industry and its sales tactics on our population, or continue to do so. So I think that, if anything, the opioid crisis informs us that we can make mistakes in both directions if we're not careful. And that having gone through that, hopefully, although I don't see evidence of it yet, we can think prospectively forward about cannabis regulation in a way that then hopefully provides access and guidance and minimizes the downside risk of now making this stuff available to the population.
Agreed. And just for a sec before we hop into Q&A, I thought we might be able to just take a little bit of a spin through opioid use disorder type analysis through Cannakeys, just to give folks a sense of like, okay, I'm coming to my doctor, perhaps with a chronic pain issue, and I'm prescribed opioids. What information could my physician find in here, rather than scrolling around through hours or days, perhaps through PubMed, to try to find the information that's not arranged in any particular way that's useful. I'm a patient coming to a doctor. How can this information help me? How can I show a physician who's completely uneducated on all this information with respect to cannabis treatment, how that might be a better approach than opioids.
So Dustin, you'd like me to jump in there?
Yes, please.
Sure, happy to. So I'm going to share my screen, and what you should all be seeing now is the homepage to the Cannakeys website. And the Cannakeys 360 platform is our first attempt really to provide some of the information and hopefully start to address some of the issues that the panel has surfaced today. And Cannakeys 360 presents the science of the endocannabinoid system in forms that are filterable and to aggregate and to provide some information, insights much more quickly, to bring the science in one place. Now, it's just the start because there are other data streams that need to come into play, such as high quality case studies from the medical setting. But again, understanding the science and the state of the science is critical, because there's a lot of talk to the state of the science, but it's been this sort of anecdotal, vague notion that's often used by prohibitionists who want to curtail or impede the growth of cannabis use. So I'm now in the medical condition search. There are 4 searches of the database. You can search the science of medical conditions, cannabinoids, terpenes, or organ systems of the body. And here in the medical condition search, there's some information here, including just the top 20 conditions by the number of clinical studies associated with them. And one of them down here is opioid dependency and overdose. There's over 240 conditions in the Cannakeys 360 platform. So I'm going to click on opioid dependency. I've seen that mentioned in the comments before. Dr. Tischler was just speaking to it. And so from the Cannakeys perspective and the science that we've been able to find, our team who's continuously looking and entering studies, here's the state of the science for the endocannabinoid system. So just to make a note that this includes not just the phytocannabinoids of the plant cannabis, but also the endocannabinoids, or endogenous or internal cannabinoids like anandamide that you may have heard of, but also synthetic groups of cannabinoids as well, that are often used in a setting, in a lab setting. So one of the first things I'm going to do is go to the filter panel and to the left, and I'm going to filter only for phytocannabinoids. So this filters for CBD and THC, but also if there's ones like CBN and also pharmaceutical preparations of them. So you can see that the science has distilled now to there are a total of 39 studies for cannabis associated with opioid dependency and overdose. 23 of them are primary, which means that they are focused on this topic. They are not related to it. And that's what shows up in the dashboard. So of those 23, there are 6 clinical studies, and there's some solid preclinical evidence. So there is some actionable information, and the state of the science panel here confirms that there's clinical evidence. There are no EU or FDA approved therapies, endocannabinoid therapies for them involving cannabis, but the positive results are uniform, that there are positive results. We also have a clinical dosing summary here. So to quickly show what the dosing information is for any given condition, where there is clinical evidence available to us, because we don't drill through any paywalls, we review what's available in the various data banks, PubMed and Cochrane, et cetera. I'm going to click on this button and you can see a quick result of the dosing summaries for 4 of the clinical results. And you can see here the forms are ingestion, inhalation, vaginal, and also another ingestion. But you can see the doses. Take a look at the CBD dosing. They're quite high, which reflects also some of what's been talked about. The fact that if you were going to get a edible at a dispensary, you'd have to eat the whole package and go back for more if you're going to come anywhere close to what the clinical evidence is suggesting. So there is that spread that many of the panelists have talked to between what's available in the dispensaries and what the science is really telling us at the clinical level. And coming down here, you can see the studies by chemotype. So chemotype, as opposed to phenotype or the plant, or strain, as the industry talks about still. Chemotypes are the constituent of the plants, and there are 3 official chemotypes of the cannabis plant, and they are based on the THC CBD ratio. And chemotype 1 is high THC, low CBD. There's 24 studies primary for opioids. So THC has been most studied. Doesn't mean it's most effective. It just means it's most studied. Chemotype 3 is high CBD and low THC, and then balanced ratio, roughly 4:1 to 1:4 ratio, which seems to be the roughly accepted standard. Though again, to Heather's points, this is not a uniform acceptance. We've polled some people and talked to a number of people, and this seems to be the most agreed upon standard for chemotype 2. And then we also have a synopsis of the research at the bottom that we adjust over time as more research comes out. Then we do have the study list, which if I hadn't filtered it would be quite a bit longer. There was well over 100 studies. But if I just want to filter on the clinical studies and see what's there and drill down further, I can filter on the clinical studies, and we have both a very short list of the 6 primary studies and another 6 related studies. So what we're trying to do here is to create, to Elana's point about the time involved, we want to create a very fast opportunity for people to quickly drill into what they're trying to look for, and find that quickly and look and get some information. And whether it's a practitioner or policy director, an educator, we're looking to support the acceleration of these kinds of decision-making and the access to the information. I saw somebody mentioned Delta 8 in the chat, so I thought I would just pop over to the cannabinoid search really quickly and take a quick peek. I haven't looked at this one in a little while, but it is getting a lot of press and there's a lot of information here out there, but there's not a lot of science, because you can see that there's a total of 10 studies. 9 of them are primary, looking at Delta 8, but there's only 1 clinical study. So if we wanted to look at that and see what that was, it was for nausea and vomiting. And here's the study here. So just to click through, which you can do with all studies in the list for all the search outputs, you can see that it was a human trial using Delta 8. It had a positive outcome. It was ingestion, and it used 18 milligrams in inedible oil form, and it was in Elana's part of the world. It's an Israeli study, which is not surprising considering the research is progressing there. So that gives you a little taste of the kind of information that we put in here. But if you said, well, I want to see what this is, I want to see where you got this information, we include the best link that we can find to the most extensive information for the study, so that the people using this, we want to eliminate as much bias as we possibly can with the presentation, and let people find the information quickly, review it in concert, see the insights, but ultimately make up their own mind and their own decisions. So clearing the filter, we go back to the full studies, and you get the sense, you can see that the outputs are a little different for the cannabinoids, but we do, for each cannabinoid and terpene search, we show the conditions where there is clinical evidence, and we also make all those links click through. So you can go to nausea and vomiting, which has a good amount, 20 double-blind placebo-controlled trials. You can see down here the clinical results are quite high. So you can see that there's also FDA and approved endocannabinoid therapeutics for those as well. So I'm going to pause right there, just a quick peek at what we're trying to build here and offering to the greater community that is trying to move the needle and support patients.
Doug, may I, before you put that away?
Sure, I can go right back.
There were 2 things I wanted to mention for the audience. One is, what is the difference between clinical and preclinical? Clinical basically means these are done in human beings, intact, usually adult, not entirely. And preclinical basically means either animal model, mouse model, or cell culture, right? So an awful lot of the information that we have is in the preclinical state, and often that gets used in policy discussions to inform decision making, but in fact is probably not medically appropriate to do so because, as I say, none of us are mice. It turns out that 92% of medications that work in mice fail in human beings. So that's a whopping percentage. The other thing I wanted to point out was that you had in some place a lovely bar graph of where these research was, where it was being done. And, and there it is. And I just want to point out as a matter of course, that while lots of research is getting done world over, there is another myth that we're not getting anything done in the United States. But if you look at this bar graph, and it was true on the opioid one as well, the United States is actually still putting out the vast majority of the research, or at least the highest amount of any country. So
yes, and that's very true. We see that consistently across the studies by country of researcher outputs, that the US is doing a lot of research. And it's just where there are big gaps, it slows down obviously on the clinical side and being able to work with people, but there's a lot of research out there. And thank you for that information about clinical and preclinical. What we are showing here in this group of 6 boxes are the preclinical studies, as Dr. Tischler said, that these are not studies done on humans, but it also reflects the strength of the science as it expands. And so the studies with the least impact and information for humans would be laboratory studies, but the strength of the science improves as you go through animal studies, the meta-analyses, the combination reviews of lots of studies. But then on the clinical side, you have the human trials and then these stronger double-blind placebo-controlled trials. And really the strongest standard are the meta-analyses of clinical evidence, because that brings together multiple studies for a specific condition. In this case, we're on the CBD dashboard, what really presents the strongest evidence. So that's what we're trying to do, is really show the state of the science, because it's at any given moment, because it's dynamic, it's changing all the time. As Uwe said earlier, we're seeing double-digit studies coming out every week. So it's going to be a continuing challenge to keep up with it. And we're trying to do that as we look to other platforms and support ways that we can support all the people that have been talking today in the work that they're doing.
Incredible platform, Doug. Thank you for sharing this with us. And, from a patient standpoint, I know you're a patient. I know we have many patients on this call, as well as physician practitioners. It's such a great resource. There isn't anything like it that I've come across that exists. It's really important that we figure out a way to make this information readily available to physicians of all types and health care professionals of all types, as well as patients, so we can really, as well as regulators, coming to this conversation from the government standpoint. That's my job, is to help Congress and the administration, governments at the state and local level, legislators and regulators understand what cannabis medicine means, and that just passing adult use measures doesn't mean that you have a functional medical program. There's a lot to sort out, and this kind of platform, I think, really shows. I'll give you a perfect example: 36 states with different variations of patient condition lists that make patients eligible to be able to use cannabis in their state. I mean, there's a platform that I think all those states could use to arrive at, oh, hey, this is what cannabis is actually being used for, to treat patient health conditions, and here's where evidence exists and here's where it doesn't. There's a lot that can be solved with functional information and the sharing of it, and I think this platform is certainly unique in that. And as ASA, I think we want to do our part to make sure this information gets shared, because it is so critical in advancing this conversation in the right way among lawmakers, regulators, and everybody who's participating in this space, represented by a lot of people on this webinar. With that, I want to make sure we make time for questions and get audience questions plugged in. Jeff is certainly helping us run questions. So I don't know if there were any, Jeff, that you wanted to raise right away.
Yeah, so great one would be, we got a question from actually one of the sponsors of this webinar, Lakeway Botanicals. Thank you very much, guys, and thanks for tuning in. They asked, how has the FDA's recent findings on CBD, that's a drug, not a dietary supplement, at least referring to Charlotte's Web filings, how is that affecting policy?
I'd be happy to take a first crack at that from a government relations standpoint. I guess the state of policy in terms of regulating hemp-derived products or cannabis-derived products is still driven in the United States through a traditional channel of FDA. Right now you've got one FDA approved product in Epidiolex, and that's it, in terms of FDA approved anything, whether it's designed to be plugged into a cosmetic product or a beverage or a food, or if it's just standalone medicine. There's nothing there really. There's plenty of activity going on among folks on the industry side in developing products that would go along those lines. But in terms of how FDA is approaching this, the short answer is in the same way it's approached everything else that comes through its doors for approval, from emergency use authorizations of COVID vaccines to all the drugs that you see on the commercials that you never want to see again with all the crazy side effects. That's kind of where the policy is right now, unfortunately. From a domestic standpoint, within the administration, you've got an administration largely viewing cannabis through the lens of disproportionate impact of criminal justice and starting to approach it that way through the Office of National Drug Control Policy. But from an FDA standpoint, we'd certainly love to hear the perspective of others on this panel on this, but they're marching down a fairly traditional lane in approaching this.
If I can add to that, I think that the FDA really kind of did the industry a huge disservice by issuing that letter to Charlotte's Web. They have a very consistent product. It's very highly tested. They know that pediatric patients are taking it. And these are the types of products that researchers at the federal level should have access to. These are the products, not saying that the stuff coming out of Ole Miss is bad, but it's one product in one potency with one set of terpenes. And so by limiting the products that researchers can use, the FDA did a very big disservice to the industry. They denied Sue Sisley's lawsuit. So now they're going through the appeals process for that, but they're really hindering the ability to conduct effective research and effective human clinical trials where we know humans are already consuming this, and particularly children are consuming this, and we should be seeing these types of products going through the clinical trials and the clinical studies.
I guess on a related note, Heather, I'd also ask, in terms of pathways to drive medicine through FDA, you're typically looking at a 10 to 15 year review process and cajillions of dollars. We're pretty far down the road in terms of 36 states having access to medical cannabis, physicians, some working with a large population of patients in their states to apply cannabis medicine to a wide range of health conditions. I guess, where does FDA catch up? I guess, what's their approach, given that I think we're not just talking about introducing a new kind of medicine in terms of cannabis that's unique in the sense that it's not like take this prescribed dose and it will achieve this effect that you're usually getting from off-the-shelf medicine that we're all accustomed to under a FDA model. You visit your doctor with a condition, they prescribe a pill, you take it, and you end up with all these kooky side effects that come out of the medicine you're taking. But I guess, cannabis is unique in that way, in that it's more of a botanical medicine. You're talking about ranges of different plant compounds and associated terpene profiles that produce a range of effects depending on your own endocannabinoid system. So with all of that said, and kind of these unique approaches to medicine, I guess, how do you see that? How do you see FDA reconciling that?
I'd like to jump in here. I think you guys are presenting a rather biased point of view on the FDA. I'm not necessarily going to champion them, but I will say that we sort of want safe and effective cannabis medicines, but we're mad at the regulatory agency that's tasked with making sure they're safe and effective. Let us remember that no medications get through FDA review because the FDA says, hey, I see you have a medicine, bring it over here and let us review it, right? The company has to say, I want this to go through the FDA process. And the cannabis industry isn't being forced to do that, and so they're not doing it. And I think that calls into question the degree to which those medicines are safe and effective. They might be, but from my point of view, I think that the world needs to step up and prove it. And some of that goes back to the things that we're talking about in terms of evidence today. But ultimately, the reality here is that there's a high standard at the FDA. And if companies aren't willing to do the work and spend the money to meet that standard, that's a bit of a problem. Granted, there are also a lot of federally mediated obstructions to being able to do that that need to be addressed. So I think I'm just going to say that there's a lot of blame to go around, but ultimately from a theoretical point of view, the FDA's job is to make sure that these medications rise to the standard of both safety and effectiveness. And we're just not seeing that in the cannabis world. I think I'll leave it there. I had more to say, but.
Great points to raise. I think that's really important to state that, there's this traditional pathway that these things come into FDA. FDA is a repository for these companies that are trying to drive medicine to the market through them to get their approval. And states really are not states don't have that expertise by and large. That's not what they do. That nexus largely rests at the federal level. And so states have developed all these different approaches where I think where the frustration exists, I think you're right, there's plenty of blame to go around. I think that where the frustration exists among patients is we'd like to see some leadership from FDA in approaching states as opposed to waiting for them to come to their door.
I think that they're hampered by both Congress and the administration, right? I mean, they don't have any authority except as delegated to them by Congress and is upheld by the president. And right now it's pretty clear that the Congress is in a position of doing nothing. There's a lot of talk, but no action. And I think it's pretty clear that Mr. Biden just doesn't want to deal with this issue. So the FDA is struggling along. They're underfunded, understaffed. COVID is going on. I actually feel kind of sympathetic to those guys. It doesn't mean that they've done all that they need to do. I think that one of the areas where this is really a huge problem is around the question of what kind of a regulatory pathway do you want for example, CBD? I think that, it's clearer for THC, but people are making the case, particularly pursuant to changes in the Colorado and California arena, that, this stuff should be okay to put in anything. So if you want to go down to the store and get a latte, well, it might have CBD in it. And, they may or may not tell you that. And I think that that's problematic because we don't generally put medicines in consumer food items. And we certainly don't do it without letting people know. And there are people for whom CBD is contraindicated. And if they go down to get their latte and they end up with a mouthful of CBD, that could be potentially lethal. So I think that, there's a lot that has to be said and done to regulate. But again, the deepest pockets and the largest voices here are those with the money, and they're the ones that are influencing policy rather than it's being science driven or medically driven.
Yeah, I agree, definitely. I think one of the challenges, especially for cannabis, is that we have both a medical product and an adult use product, and how do they marry those two things together, or how do they separate those two things, because they either got to get married or they got to get divorced, but they're medicine and they're adult use products. We have to figure out how do we have a medical product that is medically proven, medically studied, scientifically valid, and an adult use product that is also still safely produced, because we still don't want to have recalls and issues of public health significance. So yeah, I think there's definitely some work to do to figure out how we get medical and adult use to coexist.
I think that's absolutely true. And there is a strong move to push everybody into the recreational arena because it's less stringently, down to the use of the word adult use, which I think is a way of saying, yeah, it's okay that you buy these products and just kind of do DIY your healthcare. And that's a lot of the messaging that's going out. It is the only substance I can think of that really has uses both on the recreational level legitimately and as well as a medicine. And I think that's presenting us with some very interesting regulatory challenges. Somebody made a comment that the FDA is too stringent, it takes too much time and money. Well, and I don't mean to single anybody out, but I think that that's a very pervasive thought. But at the same time, what you're saying is we want it to be less expensive and less stringent, and yet we still want it to rise to the level of that kind of science. I don't see how those are not mutually exclusive. I mean, we kind of have to decide that we want this stuff to be available and to be studied and to be regulated so that people get the best medicine. And then as you said, Heather, there are also then people who are going to go out and use this stuff for fun. And I think that's fine too, again, within the provisos that you put out there, which said, you know, they shouldn't get sick from it.
Great. Other questions we have coming in, Jeff?
Yeah, another question I was interested in is someone asked about if these cannabis studies, or sort of generally, what kind of cannabis studies will get recognized by the Federal Trade Commission for claim substantiation requirements. I don't know if we have anyone to speak to that, but I'm curious.
Well, I see, you know, it's interesting, just a little background on Federal Trade Commission engagement and all this, of course. You have all of these crazy herbal supplement products that came out of, or at least were taken advantage of by Midwest multi-level marketing companies in the late 70s, early 80s, ultimately, that transpired in the formation of a number of cases about the claims made by the manufacturers of these products about the actual utility of them and producing some kind of outcome that was beneficial to anybody who would be consuming them. FTC got rolled in most of that. So you kind of have these two pathways where you've got kind of this medicine that is borne out by these kind of MLM oriented companies. Your, what was the one that Antonio Vera, Herbalife, you've got a lot of those kinds of companies that go through that lane that are making products that claim to do things that are kind of nebulous in the description. This product promotes this health outcome or something like that, but it's not really demonstrating proof of something. Whereas, you know, the FDA path is, you know, look, if you're saying this is medicine and it does this, then it's got to do this. That's my understanding of kind of these two lanes. I don't know if anybody else has other thoughts to offer there.
In the 1990s, under President Clinton, Congress deregulated a lot of and deauthorized the FDA in many ways, creating this supplement pathway. And it ultimately has undermined the rigor by which products are taken to market. And, you know, in many ways, I think the only value then is to that company. That they are allowed somehow to go out there and put products on the market that haven't been fully vetted, and sort of the workaround at the government level or the permission basis is that they can't say that it does X, Y, or Z. So then they get out there and they say may do X, Y, and Z. And frankly, I think there's just not enough enforcement around that, because, you know, by saying may or might, everybody fully knows that people will just skip the may or might and go right to the XYZ. If it didn't work, if people went, I'm not sure about may, right? Then they wouldn't do it because it wouldn't effectively sell their product. So the very fact that they're out there selling hand over fist really proves the point that that regulatory safeguard isn't a safeguard at all. And I have to tell you that in the medical literature, the substantiation for harms based on these supplements is undeniable. And I just want cannabis not to end up in that same bin.
Agreed. And I think that's the view of everybody on this panel. And I think patients and physicians who are practicing and researchers who are practicing in this space alike, if we recognize the value and utility of cannabis, and that there really are real applications of cannabis medicine to patient health conditions that produce real outcomes. We don't want to end up as the Herbalife of the world with these false claims or nebulous claims that aren't proven, or there's no effort to ultimately demonstrate the proof of, to show the actual utility of medicine that's cannabis derived or hemp derived. Other thoughts on that one before we turn to other questions? What else we got, Jeff?
Another one that I thought was interesting was a question regarding, so a lot of patients, much as we might want their doctors to be participating more, are doing a sort of self-led program, trying to journal their experiences. There's various apps and programs that you can use for that. But in terms of someone who's working with those patients, what kind of questions should they be asking? What kind of questions should these patients be asking themselves? What are good good ideas on that.
What are your thoughts there, Doug?
I can take that if you like, Doug.
Go for it.
You know, when it comes to optimizing, or when it comes to creating predictability of effect or the precision results, there are a number of things we can control when it comes to working with cannabis or cannabinoid-based therapeutics. Like, for example, we can't control the speed by which a cannabinoid crosses the blood-brain barrier. We can't really control how much of smoke is lost into the atmosphere. But there are a number of things that we can control and keep a careful record in a session log. Then in combination with monitoring these 6 things that I'm just briefly going to go through, can go a long way of mitigating adverse effects and creating just those very effects that you're looking for. And they have to do with the first thing we can control is we can determine what cannabis chemotype we want to choose. Do we want a chemotype 1 that's abundant in THC with small amounts of CBD? Which, you know, there's an abundant amount of evidence that clearly indicates this type of chemotype for a number of patient populations, like, for example, patients with central pains, patients with spinal cord injuries, patients who are challenged by drug addictions, for example. The evidence clearly points to a chemotype 1 as being a beneficial starting point to use in terms of finding the exact plant constituents that are going to be optimal for these types of patients. The next step is beyond the chemotype, what subratio between THC and CBD, which determines the 3 chemotypes that Doug already talked about when we looked at the Cannakeys panels. What subratios are present? Are we dealing with a THC to CBD ratio that's a 1:5, or is it a 1:20, or is it a 1:100? Those are going to produce different effects, and we have control over that, especially when we're dealing with tinctures and when we are looking at the label of any products that most states now require. The next thing is, what is the actual dosage amount of THC and CBD consumed in each portion taken? Then the next thing would have to do with what's called the entourage effect. What acid forms, what terpenes, what other plant constituents support or mitigate a specific effect. So as we make one change at a time and keep a careful record in our session log, those 6 things we do have control over, and by managing them and by keeping a careful record of the numbers, you know, that are associated with each of these steps, making one change at a time is then the process that you know, over hopefully a very short period of time, can get you to generate the precise effects that you want, and to, of course, mitigate any adverse effects potential. And so I just wanted to throw that in, you know, that cannabis isn't one type of cannabis. There are distinct forms of cannabis, and we can utilize the science or patients' preferences to, from the very beginning, determine which might be an optimal starting point. And that's what I wanted to bring to the mix of the discussion.
Thank you. You have other thoughts on that, Doug?
Yeah, I mean, Uwe really encapsulated the process well. And I would say for patients, especially patients who are just getting started and trying to understand where to start, if they can talk to a healthcare provider who's knowledgeable on this, that's obviously the place to start. But if they are DIYing it and they're in a position where they have no other choice, if they can look up some evidence and find it, it's hard to find. That's the reason we built the Cannakeys platform and created some options that are available to patients and tried to create it so it would be available to them and speak to them with enough information that they could use it. But for me, it's always been about listening to the body and understanding that working with cannabis medically is a process and it's a process. Even if you've arrived at something that you feel is working, your body is going to change. Your stress levels will change. Your situation in life will change, and your endocannabinoid system will shift and adjust, and you may have to adjust. And so it's not a typical Western medicine. It's a process-oriented, individualized medicine that took a long time for me to understand. And so the work continues over time. And so that's what I would share about the patient experience and what I would hope people come to understand about this medicine.
Thanks, Doug.
I'd love to kind of, oh, sorry, Dustin. I was just going to kind of piggyback on, yeah, sure. I was just going to piggyback on what Doug said, that I think rather, like, I would like to add that it's not so much about the questions that patients need to be asking as like, what's this base information that patients need to have to be able to go on and have this kind of empowered view on their own healthcare. And I think, that's really what you're speaking to, Doug, that like, obviously it would be great if like everyone has their own Dr. Tischler that they can consult with, but most people don't. And so there's some really basic information, which I feel like changes the game. So number one, and this is like, been spoken about here. Number one, there are different types of cannabis. Like most people don't know that there are different types of cannabis. So once you have this understanding, there are different types of cannabis, you can know that if you try one type of cannabis and it doesn't work for you, oh, okay, I tried one type and now I'm going to try a different type of cannabis. So that's number one. Number two is the biphasic effect. I think it's super important that all kind of novice patients or novice cannabis users in general know that cannabis can have one effect at a low dose and then the exact opposite effect at a high dose. So we've got to get ourselves out of this headspace of, more is better, because you might end up with at a low dose, it's helping your anxiety, and at a high dose, you're really paranoid, for example. So that's really important. And the reason I think this is so important is because it's going to improve the patient outcomes at the end. There's more chance that people are going to be able to stick to what is ultimately, basically for every patient, a trial and error process. So with this kind of basic education to begin with, it means that even if someone ends up going into an adult use dispensary and encountering a bud tender that doesn't have the level of education that, I know there are some bud tenders here in the audience that doesn't have this level of education, they're still going to be able to know for themselves, okay, I'm choosing a type of cannabis and I'm going to start low and go slow. And that in and of itself is going to, have the power to improve the outcomes for that patient.
Agreed. And I think, there's, I know we've talked about some great resources on this panel. I think, so much of what Elana has built in Canigma, what Doug and what Uwe have built in Cannakeys, what Heather drives to the patient-focused certification program, the resources we have at ASA. I think this kind of group of resources is something that we certainly want to bring people's attention through this webinar. A lot of the stuff that's out there is available and free. And I think getting patients, getting physicians, getting researchers, getting bud tenders, getting folks who are working out, interacting with patients to understand all this information, understand where it lives, so they can connect with it and use it, I think is really important. What we're driving at here to really kind of solve all the challenges that all these different perspectives are facing. Were there any other questions that we wanted to jump in here, Jeff, before we wrap up?
No, I think all of the questions would require a little bit more time than we've got. I want to be respectful of everyone's time here, so maybe we can just have some closing thoughts from y'all.
Fair enough. Yeah, I don't know if folks across the panel have anything they want to close with and leave the audience with before we wrap up, but happy to hear those thoughts.
I'll go first.
I think. Go ahead, Heather. Sure.
No, I just want to say thanks everyone for attending today. It's really critical that we continue to get information out there, especially about resources that are available. At ASA, we get asked constantly what resources are available to me as a patient, as a physician, as a consumer, as a regulator, and we want to make sure that they have access to the correct information and information that's going to be helpful and useful and easily available to drive decision making and make it on a path that's going to be safe for patients.
100%.
I would just want to say thanks to ASA for hosting this webinar and for continuing to do this work on behalf of patients and to move the needle with policy. We're really excited to be working with you all and offer a discount to ASA members. So urge people to join ASA and participate and support what they're doing. And thanks to Dr. Tischler and to Elana and all the panel members for all the work. As you just said, Dustin, everyone's doing their part to bring information that's high quality and that will really do the best job in informing patients, their caregivers, and everybody who's trying to do the work. So thank you all, and thanks for participating today.
Very quickly, I just wanted to say it's really fun to be part of these groups and panels and that are ultimately enabled to empower patients to make more informed and discerning decisions about cannabis, about what type of cannabis to use to generate the exact outcomes that they want, and to do it in such a way that it's as safe as possible. So it's a delight. Thank you for all.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think we spend a lot of time, moaning about how far there is to still go in terms of research, in terms of regulation, but we've come a long way. I think it's a really exciting time, to be involved in this industry. So thanks, to everyone on the panel. Well, I wanted to kind of point out that we do have a lot of information really for everyone on the Canigma. So please go check it out. And we also have some brochures that anyone who's going to be in Vegas next week at MJ BizCon, we're going to have them around, but you can also find me on LinkedIn. We have brochures for bud tenders, for patients, and for healthcare providers that really kind of, as I was saying before, just simplify the information. So if we can just like straighten out that baseline of cannabis education across the board, I think we'll be in a much better place. So get in touch if you'd like a copy. I'd be happy to send you a digital version as well of any of those 3 brochures.
Thank you, Elana, and great point. And ASA will also be out at MJ BizCon talking about the patient-focused certification program. So definitely connect with us there. I can't say enough great things about all the information that Canigma produces, from short video clips that really do a good job of simplifying something that's very complicated, whether it's the patient or physician or regulator, lawmaker, whoever needs to understand. You guys do a killer job. Thank you for that work. Thank you, Uwe and Doug, for creation of the Canigma platform. Excited to be able to share that with ASA members and everyone else who can dig into it. So much great information on there. Thank you for all your dedication in ensuring all that information lives there and that it's accessible to patients, to physicians, and everyone who tuned in today. Thank you, Heather, obviously, for all the killer work you do across PFC and ASA in general. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Looking forward to chatting with you on our next webinar. But thanks, everybody, for tuning in today. And a copy of this will certainly be available to folks for you to check out later. But thank you from Americans for Safe Access for joining this webinar, and have a great rest of your day.